This episode is brought to you by Battlefield 6. Battlefield 6 is the ultimate all-out warfare experience. Rip through the skies in aerial dogfights. Demolish your surroundings for a strategic advantage. Harness complete control over every action and movement using the kinesthetic combat system. Drop into multiplayer with your squad, or fight furiously as a member of the Dagger 1-3 squad in a gritty, adrenaline-fueled single-player campaign where you'll defend a world on the edge of collapse.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Carvana makes car selling fast and easy from start to finish. Enter your license plate or VIN and get a real offer in seconds, down to the penny. If you accept, Carvana will come pick up your car from your driveway. Or you can drop it off at one of our car vending machines. Either way, you get paid instantly. It's fast, transparent, and 100% online. Car selling that saves your time. That's Carvana.
Carvana.
Pickup fees may apply.
Once upon a mundane morning, Barb's day got busy without warning. A realtor in need of an open house sign. No, 50 of them, and designed before 9.
My head hurts.
Any mighty tools to help with this plight? Aha! Barb made her move. She opened Canva and got in the groove.
Bulk creating Canva sheets. Create 50 signs fit for suburban streets.
Done in a click, all complete.
Sweet!
Now, imagine what your dreams can become when you put imagination to work at canva.com.
Qatar. It's a small country. It's one of the smallest of the Gulf states, a population of less than 3 million people, but a GDP that outsizes their population, and it has become central to peace in the Middle East, the push for a Middle East peace plan by President Donald Trump, and yet it also throws its weight around the Western world. Hello, and welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host, and if you're like me, you don't know as much about Qatar as you'd like to, especially at this pivotal moment in time. You've heard that Qatar and Egypt were interlocutors with the United States in trying to secure a peace deal. You may have also heard that they can be a malignant force in the Western world, funding universities to the tunes of tens of millions of dollars and, according to some, funding anti-Semitism on campus and other fights that undermine the Western way of life. So, what is the reality with Qatar? That is what we are trying to break down on the Full Comment Podcast this week. And to do that, well, two people who know a lot about the region, but with two very different points of view. Professor Alon Ben-Meir is a retired professor from New York University. He was born in Iraq. He has studied the region extensively, writes on the topics of the Middle East extensively, and appears on television, radio, podcast, and elsewhere. On the other side of the issue is Haras Rafiq. Born and raised in the United States to a Muslim family, he is someone who is, well, very much of the view that Qatar is not a benign force, not a friend. He is a trustee of the UK charity of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism. He's been a counter-extremism and counter-terrorism expert since 2004, working with the UK government, the American government, Canadians, and elsewhere. And he is also part of the group that is known as the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. We spoke to both gentlemen from their respective homes in New York City and in the United Kingdom, and want to bring you this conversation. First, my discussion with Professor Ben-Meir. So, Professor, how did Qatar end up as this linchpin in Middle Eastern security right now in the peace talks? This is a country with some difficult relationships with its neighbors, some questionable ties in the past to terrorism, promoting anti-Western issues, and now they are the linchpin. How did we arrive at this point?
Well, this is, go back, you might say, several decades, for the matter of fact. The Qatar is the motherland of the Jazeera. So the Qatar has been, broadcasting itself as a country that has been advancing, so to speak, of free speech. Al Jazeera has had a significant influence over the Arab world for many, many years now. So this is a factor, important factor. The second thing, Qatar was the home, so to speak, of the Hamas leadership throughout the years. That is, Hamas openly supported Hamas financially. As a matter of fact, Netanyahu himself was a conduit. He transferred billions, I should say, in cash, in suitcases of money from Qatar to the Hamas. So Qatar was a very strong supporter of Hamas, and Hamas leadership primarily reside in Qatar. The other thing is Hamas, of course, Qatar Wealth has played a extremely important role in financing its various projects throughout the Middle East, and it has acquired this reputation. And the most important is, of course, it's the house of the largest U.S. military base in the region, and it has been as such. So it is extremely close ally of the United States, and it has held that position for many decades now. And that gives it the sort of not a regional, become a regional power, you might say, but also international, has been able to exert significant influence as a result of that, because of its involvement in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because of its strong relationship with the United States, and because its ability to put its money, so to speak, where its mouth is, by financing any kind of project that deemed to advance its national interest. And as such, the Emir of Qatar places himself in a very important role, and he continued to adhere to that, to play that role for many years now. And the final point I want to make is the attacking Qatar, that is trying to assassinate Hamas negotiator, a few weeks back. That also put, again, Qatar in the spotlight again, and made it possible now for President Trump, actually, when Netanyahu was in the White House, to apologize to Qatar for the attack. And that gave Qatar another layer of, might say, another lever of strength to have presented itself as a major player.
You mentioned that Hamas is resident in Qatar. How did that happen? Because they weren't always there. My understanding is it goes back to the Obama administration wanting them there to, facilitate negotiations at one point.
Yeah, well, Hamas, Qatar believed all along in the Palestinian cause. They do not necessarily advocate violence per se, but they have believed in a Palestinian cause, and they saw Hamas as a movement that, from their perspective, could advance the Palestinian cause. Again, regardless of their own calculation, from their perspective, this was a necessary element to do in order to keep the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, so to speak, alive and not dormant. And so from there, as they saw Hamas as a conduit to keep the light, so to speak, albeit they have not advocated or encouraged Hamas to undertake necessarily consistent violent action against Israel. So they played it both ways because, again, having close relationship with the United States was very important to them. On the other hand, they were able also to maintain that kind of relationship with an extremist Palestinian group. And I think that put them all along in a very better position than any other Arab countries in playing the role they're playing today, because they can claim to have been behind Hamas years back, and now they have been able to gain significant influence over Hamas, to be able now to persuade Hamas to a great extent to go along with the various concessions they have been making all along.
The issue of the payments from Qatar to Hamas has come up frequently, and people who are, they're beyond strong critics of the Israeli government. They seem to believe things that aren't quite true. They will say Hamas is just an Israeli invention, and look, they funded them through Qatar and all of this. I spoke to the gentleman who delivered the first payments to Qatar years ago, a gentleman named Colonel Grishka Yakubovich, and he said at the time that everyone thought this was the right idea, that this would bring about peace. Was everyone just misguided, but the Qataris, the Israelis, the Americans, because they all seem to think it would bring about peace and stability, and Hamas obviously had different ideas?
I think precisely the opposite is what's actually happened. Netanyahu was very clear, and he said it on a number of occasions. we need to support Hamas in order to maintain the cleavage, the gap between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. And in so doing, we can prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. He has said that time and time and again. Quoting him, those who want to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state should be supporting Hamas. And in so doing, maintaining the competitiveness between the two sides. That was really the Netanyahu's idea from day one. He sustained that for all the time that he has been in power. And I can tell you from sources that I'm very familiar with, and I'm first-hand sources, I can say that Israeli intelligence as well, Netanyahu himself knew all along for years now. The extent of the tunnels that are being built, the extent of the money, how much of that money they've been receiving from Qatar was going to procuring weapons, developing new weapons for Hamas. Hamas and Netanyahu knew this all along. But from his perspective, maintaining that relationship is going to be a factor in preventing the Israeli-Palestinian from getting together, united, and to move toward and to demand a Palestinian state. That's what he wanted all along. And as a matter of fact, throughout these negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians, going back 2008, 2009, with Olmert and others, Netanyahu always maintained if there's a unity government, he will not negotiate with the Indian government because Hamas is part of it. But he will not negotiate with all Palestinians because they are not united. That has been his gameplay all along. So to him, this was a fact. Supporting Hamas directly led to preventing the establishment of the Palestinian state.
Qatar has also been quite successful in building up their influence in Western countries, the United States, in Canada, United Kingdom, elsewhere. A lot of money going towards universities. Has this been an attempt by Qatar to, extend their influence beyond the Arab world? You mentioned Al Jazeera, and yes, they are influential within Western countries with the Arab diaspora, but they don't have the same clout that they do in the Middle East and elsewhere. So is this an attempt, all this money to the universities, to buy up influence?
There's no doubt about it. They have been used significant wealth in order to advance their interest outside Qatar, outside the Arab world, in Europe. And by financing, from making significant contribution to many universities in Europe and elsewhere. This is part of their overall plan. And they have always, using the fact that the United States has maintained the largest military base in Qatar, that was something that they've always been advertising, that they are actually pivotal to Western interest in the Middle East. They are pivotal to Western security in the Middle East. This is something they've been able to sell, and they've been able to sell it effectively as a result.
Donald Trump clearly had to lean on Benjamin Netanyahu to get him to the place where he is now. How much did Qatar have to lean on the leadership of Hamas, be it Sheikh Mohammed or others in the Qatari leadership, saying to their Hamas contacts, you need to accept this deal. You need to move forward, because they've been close many times and then walked away. And of course, the countries such as Canada, the United Kingdom, France, recognizing a Palestinian state at the United Nations just weeks ago could have emboldened them. So how much was it Qatar leaning on them and saying, no, it's time to take the deal, that got them to this place?
Based on, I don't know, very heavily, that have leaned on them. They have been telling them clearly, we have supported you for all these years. And this is where we are now. We've found ourselves up now. You have a historic opportunity to change course, to change direction. But Hamas is also saying, okay, we want to play a role. We want to play a role in the political process. This is what I'm hearing from Qataris themselves. They want to play a role. Hamas amended its charter in 2017, agreeing to the two-state solution at the time. Before they were calling for Hudna for like a ceasefire for 20 years. But in 2017, they've changed their charter. I think if they're given the opportunity, a path now, to be a part of the political process, you might find Hamas to be amenable to join the movement toward peace. And then again, you have also the Arab state led by Saudi Arabia who are insisting that further normalization of relations with Israel by Saudis and many other Arab countries and other Islamic states is going to hinge upon establishing a clear path toward a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, two-state solution. Hamas is in favor of that. 100% is in favor of that. The question is, will they be given the opportunity? Because to suggest lay down your arms and you will have absolutely no role to play in the future, that is going to be a problem. That's going to basically freeze the whole process, as I see it.
So you don't believe the claim that Hamas launched October 7th to scuttle the normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, because that has been widely reported that they wanted to make sure that didn't happen.
Absolutely, that is the case. That was part of their strategy. Yes, they have done.
But now it's different.
Well, of course, you look at any revolutionary movement, historically speaking. Sooner or later, after decades, after sometimes centuries of fighting, they come to the conclusion that they have come to a state where they may have to make a choice. Are we going to have to, how much longer will they continue to fight? I think they have succeeded. And honestly, I feel very strongly they have, as I weigh the whole picture today, as far as I'm concerned, Hamas is led to where we are today. Hamas's attack, however disgusting, savagery it was, and the horrific destruction that took place in Gaza has changed the dynamic of Israeli-Palestinian conflict in a fundamental way. And in my view, the two-state solution today become more viable option than any time before, going back 30 or 40 years for that matter. So things change. The dynamics have changed in a dramatic way because of these events. And Hamas, if there are any people wise among them right now, they have brought this about, and they can capitalize on it. Doha, Qatar is playing a very important role in saying to them, you have made this, you have brought it to this point, let's build on it, because you have no way of succeeding militarily against Israel. Israel will always be able to crush you, to crush any violent resistance, as it has all along. So you have no chance of defeating Israel by violence. That is not going to happen. And since now they have you got to a point where you can capitalize on what have changed globally in support of the Palestinian cause. And from that perspective, Hamas can say they have won. They have won this battle.
How important is it to have Saudi Arabia and all these other countries from the region backing the peace plan? And does that keep both the Israelis and the Palestinians on side? The Israelis because they want that normalization of relations. Palestinians because, well, Qatar and others have been their patrons, and they won't be there if they start fighting again.
I think, Saudi Arabia has played and continued to play extremely important role, not just in and of itself to normalize relation with Israel, but given its status as the leading Arab state today, because of its position as the representative of Sunni Islam. What Saudi Arabia does or says, it matters a great deal at this point. And I think as long as Saudi Arabia continue to insist that it will not normalize relation with Israel until there is a clear path toward a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that's going to be very important. That will continue to put pressure on the Israeli government. And I might say, I have to say that I don't really expect that this government, the Netanyahu government, as it is composed today, is going to go along with the Palestinian statehood. That has to change. So we are far off from talking about it practically speaking in terms of here we're going to have moving toward two-state solution. There's going to be significant change within the Israeli mindset itself, how to approach this whole thing. But what happened in the last 2 years is awakened many people, both in Israel and among the Palestinians, that this is a dead end. that continuing violence, resistance, continuing war between the two sides has led to nowhere. And in fact, today, Israeli-Palestinian relations has been worse than it has been since 1948. So they both the strategy of resistance, violent resistance, has failed on both sides. Israeli use of a brutal power, occupation has failed. And the Palestinian resistance, Islamic resistance, jihad, Hamas has also failed. So I think there is now a crossroad, and both sides need to face it. Where do we go from here? Continuing violent resistance, continuing war, it is not going to lead to any better result than what's happening today.
For years, Saudi Arabia was, in the lead up to 9/11, turning a blind eye towards groups like Al-Qaeda, at times playing footsies with terrorism. That charge has been made against Qatar in recent years. Saudi Arabia evolved away from that. How do you see Qatar when it comes to their support of terrorism generally throughout the region?
I think Qatar is not supporting really other, to my knowledge, any other Islamic resistance movement other than Hamas has been all along. Even their relationship with Islamic Jihad was extremely limited. Today, Qatar wants to continue to play a very important role. One of the prerequisites that the Qatari Emir sees that they will have to support a peace process and no longer support any resistance movement, any violent resistance movement. This is what they are doing now. This is the path they have chosen to do because they want to hold on to the position that they have been able to acquire, to gain now, and not allow that to wither. So that's their strategy now, to continue to play a very important role, but it will have to be excluding the support of any other violent resistance movement among the Palestinians.
A quick break from this discussion, and when we come back, my conversation with Haras Rafiq with a very different point of view.
A message from McAfee. Wondering why the post office is texting you, or why you owe thousands of dollars in toll fees? Because someone's trying to scam you. The good news? McAfee can help. With McAfee's award-winning scam detection, it's easy to tell what's real and what's fake over text, in your inbox, and online. If they're
You want a free gift?
Seriously? If they're faking it, they're not making it past us. Get award-winning scam detection today. McAfee.com/keepitreal.
Hi, I'm Jim. I'm not an actor, just a guy living with prostate cancer. My wife and I face each day head on. We asked my doctor about Xtandi enzalutamide.
Xtandi 40 milligram tablets treats men with prostate cancer that has spread to other parts of the body and responds to a medical or surgical treatment to lower testosterone. Xtandi may cause serious side effects: seizure, a brain condition called PRESS, allergic reactions, heart disease that can lead to death, falls and bone fractures, swallowing problems, or choking that can lead to death. Stop Xtandi and get medical help at once if your face, tongue, lip, or throat starts swelling. Tell your doctor at once if you faint, have a seizure, quickly worsening headache, decreased alertness, confusion, vision problems, chest pain or discomfort, or shortness of breath. Xtandi can cause harm to an unborn baby or miscarriage. Use birth control during and 3 months after Xtandi. Common side effects include muscle and joint pain, feeling unusually tired, hot flashes, constipation, less appetite, diarrhea, high blood pressure, bleeding, falls, fractures, and headache.
Visit Xtandi.com to watch my story.
Halliday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Halliday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Halliday. Halliday, bring it on.
This is Tristan Hopper, the host of Canada Did What?, where we unpack the biggest, weirdest, and wildest political moments in Canadian history you thought you knew until you what really happened. Stick around at the end of the episode to hear a sample of one of our favorite episodes. If you don't want to stick around, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get podcasts.
Well, you've heard one side of the argument about Qatar, that they are a good force, that they are vibrant partners of the United States. That's not the view of everyone. And so we wanted to get a different idea. Haras Rafiq is someone who has been studying terrorism. He's been studying issues around Qatar for years. He has advised governments in the United Kingdom, in Canada, in the United States, government institutions as well, and joins us on the line from the UK. Haras, it's great to speak to you again. Your view on Qatar, a malign element, a benign element?
First of all, Brian, thank you for having me on your show again. It's always a pleasure to be on. The question that you asked is actually, the answer is very straightforward. Qatar, for the last 5 years plus, has been one of the single drivers and supporters and promoters and enablers and funders of what we believe and what we call, and actually it's not a name that we've made up, Islamist extremism around the world. And when I say Islamist, I'm talking of Islamism as opposed to Islam. In the same way that we have a difference between social and socialism, social happens to be the way that we interact, and socialism is a distinct political ideology that just happens to be left of center. Islamism is separate to Islam, and it is a distinct political ideology. Islamism
is a political interpretation of Islam. Is that how you would put it?
So Islamism, as from the words of the Islamists, let's use their definitions. First of all, Islamism is a plausible reading of Islam, one of many, and it's a contemporary reading that comes from two places, from the Middle East for the Muslim Brotherhood and from sort of Indian, Southeast Asia with the Jamaat Islami. And they say, and they use the word Islamism, Islamiyun in Arabic, to differentiate themselves from ordinary Muslims at the time. Two things that they have that are very clear, and one is a tactic. The first thing is that it is the desire to actually enforce a version of state law derived from the personal code of Sharia on all of the people in a state. Secondly is to spread that around the world, and the tactic is to wipe Israel off the map. Islam is a religion that's practiced by people in so many different ways around the world, often excommunicating each other, I hasten to add. But Islamism is, as far as they're concerned, and as far as they've defined, a distinct political ideology, but it is a plausible reading of Islam, one of many.
I think that part, that there are so many different interpretations, is lost on people in the West, even though there's more than 25,000 different denominations of Christianity, and we don't bat an eye at that, but perhaps it's not as political, at least these days. You're a Muslim. Would you be excommunicated by the Islamists?
I'm going to answer that question by saying I have been excommunicated by the Islamists. It's not that I would. Over the years, I've been called a kafir, an apostate, a heretic, an Islam. But actually, it's not Muslims that tend to call me an Islamophobe. It's non-Muslims that tend to call me an Islamophobe, and those that are actually working as what we call part of the Red-Green Alliance, where red represents the regressive left and green represents Islamist theocracies. Yeah, I've been excommunicated many times, but my thing is I'm from the aspects of traditional classical Islam, which isn't political Islam, nor is it Islamism.
So your view is that Qatar is trying to spread this. Is that through funding of universities? Is it through Al Jazeera? Is it all of the above? Is it, we see the funding of universities in Canada is significant. It's even bigger in the United States, though. Is this all part of an attempt to push a viewpoint that is at odds with the West, or are they just trying to, as our previous guests say, well, they're good partners with the Americans?
So there was a time when most, if not all, of the Arab states in the Middle East were funding, supporting, promoting, whether it's through universities, whether it's through other elements of soft power, the Muslim Brotherhood ideology. Something interesting and very important happened a few years ago, where Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and other countries have since caught up as well, for their own reasons, I hasten to add, decided that Islamism, and particularly Muslim Brotherhood, was a direct threat to their own sovereignty and to peace within the region. What they decided to do was actually ban the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist entity and any of their offshoots and derivatives. Qatar didn't. And there was a Gulf blockade of Qatar a few years ago when they tried to put pressure on Qatar to try to stop enabling and continuing with their support. And the fact that Islamism and the Muslim Brotherhood is very much part of the institution within Qatar, Qatar decided to double down. The blockade didn't work, and they got support from Turkey and from Iran, so they tried a different approach. Right now, in the Middle East, in the Arab countries, the majority, the big ones that we would consider, let's putting Kuwait to one side, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Jordan, Egypt have all banned the Muslim Brotherhood ideology as a terrorist entity. Qatar hasn't. I hasten to add a sidebar. Israel is also another country that hasn't banned the Muslim Brotherhood, but that's another sort of point that rather than banning them, they actually have members of the Muslim Brotherhood ideology who are representatives within Parliament, and that's the decision they've taken. We can discuss that later if you like. But to answer your question directly, Qatar decided that they want to influence. They're a very small country. They're one of the smallest countries in the region. That they want to have influence within the region, throughout the West. So they decided to actually continue with this funding, supporting in universities, but other aspects as well. The Muslim Brotherhood came up with a strategy in the 1980s, and the document was found in a Swiss counter-terrorism raid, and then another document was found that actually supported that in the US and was used in the Holy Land Foundation trials, a 100-year plan on how they're going to infiltrate and affect change within Western countries, especially North America, and that includes Canada and the US. Qatar has been promoting that and supporting it financially around the world. Canada is one of the main places, the US, of course, in the UK and in Europe as well. But they're still doing it. They haven't stopped. And they are really causing... I blame, in the modern day times, Qatar for actually enabling this ideology that is a direct threat to our liberal secular democracies more than any other country in the world through the financing and the direct support that they're giving.
Can you speak to me a bit about the Muslim Brotherhood? Because while I'm familiar with it, I'm sure many listeners are not. And, my read of Canada as it has stood for the last 20 years that I've been looking at this is fertile ground for the Muslim Brotherhood.
Absolutely. So the Muslim Brotherhood was post the age of the empires, when we had the Ottoman Empire and we had the British Empire. When that collapsed sort of after World War I and started to decline, we saw the Middle East was carved up into protectorates, and Britain and France and others. And there was a group of people at the time led by a guy called Hassan al-Banna, who used to be a school teacher, that wanted to bring back in what they called the glory days of Islam. And they thought, well, we need to become more in line with what they considered to be Islamic values from their perspective. So the Muslim Brotherhood was born, and then along the way there were instances where they worked with governments, and they were born in Egypt. They found fertile ground for their ideology outside of Egypt. They found lots of money, and with that money they were able to spread this ideology around the world. They've never really wanted an Islamic state in Europe. Their focus has always been to have it somewhere in the Middle East. Now let's move on to what they were doing, what the strategy has been in the West. The Muslim Brotherhood does not exist as an official entity in Canada, the UK or the US. Rather, what they've did, because of this whole history of sometimes being banned, sometimes working with governments, etc., they used a strategy of getting their people to set up organizations, institutions, whether it's in education, whether it's to speak to government, whether it's academia, whether it's just social care, that were aligned directly to their ideology And what we've seen over the years is funding initially from Saudi Arabia and the UAE and others, but they've cut it and they no longer support it. Now from Qatar, that has actually created this beast that actually has a very high level of success in the way that they've been able to penetrate our societies.
Are we able to tie in the protest movements that we've seen since October 7th, supporting Hamas, supporting violent terrorist acts, to this funding from Qatar, through Muslim Brotherhood or other organizations, through their funding of Al Jazeera and a media outfit that is still freely available to get in Canada while other media outlets are shut down or blocked? Can we tie all of that back to Qatar?
So we can tie a lot of things to Qatar which are directly related to terrorism in other countries. And there's plenty of sort of news open source out there where Qatar has been accused by its neighbours and even by the US and even by the UK of actually funding terrorist activities, not in Canada. But what we can say about Canada, if we're talking specifically about Canada, what they've been able to do and what they've done is, first of all, is create the dissemination of Islamism. And we find ourselves in a situation that we see with the protest where the entryism has been so great through professors, through their funding. Look, Qatar is funding a lot of universities in Canada. You've got universities like McGill and others, and we've in our report that we did as ISCAP, we've put the facts out on the table. But what they've done is they've created this beast, and now we're moving on to what we're calling Islamism beyond Islamist and Islam. And that is where we have non-Muslims, we have non-Islamists that have come together on common platforms, this hatred of Jews, this hatred of Israel, especially after post October the 7th, where the messaging, the demands of these activists, these encampments, are directly in line with what the Islamists have been asking for. We've heard people on these encampments actually in the list of demands demanding the release of convicted Islamist terrorists. What's that in the West, in the US and other places? I don't see what that's...
And they're portrayed just as, well, they're hostages, just like the Israeli hostages. No, they killed a lot of people in a terrorist attack.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, we in the West, in Canada has its own legal system, and it is separate from government. It's independent. The judiciary is, and the people, or in the US or the UK, the people that have actually, and they're talking about convicted terrorists in the West. They're not even talking about people in Israel. They're talking about Asia Bibi. This is a person who's Al-Qaeda, who's been convicted by going through the due process in the US of killing or enabling and supporting and killing a lot of people. And these are the demands. And I don't see what that's got to do with the release of hostages in Israel or actually a ceasefire in Gaza. These are demands that you would only expect and hear from Muslims who were Islamist a few years ago. So the funding has enabled this ideology through academia, through professors, through the grants, of actually spreading and becoming almost mainstream in a lot of universities. And I'll give you another example of something. So we did a report on Texas A&M in the US. And they receive billions of and sometimes undocumented money from Qatar proxies. And the proxies happen to be the Qatar Foundation, which is a separate company but wholly owned by the government. So when a president from a university says, we don't receive any money from the Qatari government, technically and legally, they're actually correct. They're not lying. But what they actually mean is that, yeah, we've got money from Qatar Foundation, which is a separate entity, which is wholly owned by the Qatari state. So it is actually coming from the government. But Texas A&M was giving billions. And we found online on one of their portals, on the Qatar Foundation portals, the actual contract. And there were three problematic areas. One was that Qatar owned all of the IP and all the research that it actually commissioned, and we found that approximately 10% of that research had potential dual purpose applications, including nuclear and other weapons. The second thing was that they had access to all student information, and of course, they owned all of the IP. And we exposed it. They doubled down and said, no. And then we actually put more data out and give them their credit. The governors, the trustees of Texas A&M, one of the most prestigious universities in the US, actually took a decision that based on all of this evidence, that they will pull out of Doha in Education City. So we've exposed what Qatar is doing. It's happening in Canada as well. A lot of it is about ideology, but some of it is actually commissioning and getting the best research done and then owning the IP. It's soft power.
Okay, just a quick aside, and then we'll move on. On that defense by the university, that's like saying, well, I didn't go to the whorehouse because they sent someone over to my hotel room. It's the same thing.
Exactly. That's what it is, and that's why a lot of these presidents from you must have seen all these congressional hearings.
Yeah. Oh yes.
Where a lot of presidents were asked, "Oh, are you receiving any money from the Qatari government?" And some of them said no, and some of them said, "Oh, we'll have to get back on you. We don't know the answer to that question." And some of them said no. Well, they didn't really technically lie. They didn't go to the whorehouse. They had the whore come to them.
Yeah, unreal. Yeah. Now, how should we feel about Qatar being so central to the peace talks? It's left me uneasy from the beginning. But, just we were speaking with Professor Ben-Meir from NYU, and he was singing the praises of Qatar being involved and a staunch ally of the United States and a real player in the region. I have my concerns. Because of the housing of Hamas for so long, because of the soft power that you've been describing, with them being so vital to the peace process that's going on, does that raise any red flags for you? I mean, I will say this, Sheikh Mohammed, the prime minister, appears to have exerted good pressure to land us at a good spot. We'll see how long that lasts. But do you have any concerns?
I have a lot of concerns, and I have some hope as well, by the way. It's not all doom and gloom. My initial concerns are based on the following. We have to ask the question, why have Qatar been so instrumental in being able to mediate this, what we hope is a long-term peace plan? And the reason is that they are not only housing the Muslim Brotherhood, because let's not forget, Hamas said in their charter, in their founding charter, we are the Palestinian chapter of the Muslim Brotherhood. So when we talk about Hamas, we can talk about the Muslim Brotherhood because they said we're part of the Muslim Brotherhood. They said it very clearly. Qatar has been instrumental because they house them, they support them, they listen. The Hamas leaders who are billionaires who clearly take a commission from the billions of dollars that Qatar has given to Palestinians in Gaza over the years. They house them, they support them, they fund them. They are the same ideology. My question to Qatar is, and I think I kind of know some of the answers to this, why haven't they been able to do this deal a year ago or a year and a half ago? Why are they so all of a sudden instrumental and being able to negotiate this deal when this deal or versions of this deal have actually been sitting on the table for over a year and it's been rejected by many people?
You mentioned that to me earlier before we were recording. This deal was there and nobody really talked about it, thought about it, looked at it.
Yeah, but the Biden administration didn't want to look at it. At the time, for whatever reason, Bibi Netanyahu said no. I think that, and by the way, this deal, we're all saying that Qatar is instrumental. Yes, they are. Why are they instrumental? Because they brought their buddies to the table, and the people that they fund, the people that listen to them, to actually negotiate a deal with Israel, with the US and Egypt and Turkey and other countries being there as well. But let's not forget the other countries in the region as well. This deal is about Saudi Arabia, it's about the UAE, it's about Jordan, it's about Egypt, it's about all of the other countries as well who have been wanting this deal for a long time. Qatar hasn't been able to persuade, or maybe they haven't even tried, been able to persuade, or maybe they haven't even tried to persuade Hamas to actually agree to all of these things. And if you look at Netanyahu, from his perspective, I don't think that what Yahya Sinwar and the leaders of Hamas expected to be the result of October the 7th is what they've actually ended up with. Through the actions of Israel in defending themselves, they've been able to decapitate Hezbollah. They've taken out the nuclear threat from Iran for now. They've actually dealt with the Houthis. Iraq, the proxies in Iraq have been quiet. There hasn't been an attack on Israel from Iraq from a long time. So maybe he was waiting to actually clear the ground from some of the other potential strikes. But Qatar really hasn't tried, I believe, to the fullest force over the last 2 years to get Hamas to agree to releasing the hostages. And so one could argue, or one could ask the question, is it partially Qatar's fault that the hostages haven't been released over the last 2 years sooner? Then I'll put the blame on another side, the Biden administration. They look. I know this because some of the work that I do. They weren't really interested either. So
why were they not interested?
I can't answer that question exactly. I can only give you my analysis. I think there was some ideological influence within people at the administration that actually were very much in line with the whole narrative of from the river to the sea. That's my analysis. I don't know the exact answer. And I think there was some reluctance. And then there were some demands from Saudi Arabia as well, because again, why did I asked myself the question, and I've been working in Saudi Arabia for the last 4 years as part of some of the work that I do. I asked myself the question on October the 7th, why now? Why has Hamas and PIJ ordered and supported by Iran? Why have they done what they did now? Why didn't they do it before? And the reality of the situation was that there was a broader deal that Saudi and others were considering with Israel for normalization. And what Saudi wanted was very simple. They wanted from the US an enhanced deal to protect them at that time from Iran, because they were worried about Iran. Secondly, they wanted supervised nuclear energy. And the third thing, they just wanted a roadmap for some form of Palestinian self-determination. They weren't asking for it right now. They like the peace plan, some form of road plan that if X happens and we can move on to Y, and if Y happens we can move on to A. The Biden administration just wasn't interested. And I can't answer for sure the reasons why.
That's the theory, which is widely accepted, that Hamas launched the attack on October 7th to scupper any attempts at normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the West.
This is my own personal analysis. I actually said it on the day, and evidence that I've seen and sort of the build up to pre-October the 7th that I was partially involved in leads me to that assessment. And for me, it's a very strong theory. Again, the only people that can speak to exactly why they did it are the people that did it. But why didn't Qatar, if they're so influential, which they are, with Hamas, their leaders sitting in Doha, why didn't they stop them?
I had scribbled down to ask you, are the Qataris ideologically aligned with Hamas? Professor Ben-Meir would say no. It sounds like you would say yes.
The whole of the Qatari infrastructure, the institutional infrastructure, and that which is manifested as one example of Al Jazeera. If you look at what Al Jazeera is pumping out in Arabic, it's totally different to what they're pumping out in English, and the stuff they're pumping out in English is very much in line with the Muslim Brotherhood Islamist ideology anyway. The Arabic stuff is actually even worse. Institutionally, and this comes from the top, institutionally, the Muslim Brotherhood ideology is so intertwined within the whole of the Qatari, the whole of Qatar, like it was at one time in Saudi Arabia, I hasten to add, which it isn't now. At this moment in time, that hasn't changed. Yet. I'll say yet.
We saw Benjamin Netanyahu apologize to the Qatari government for his airstrike to try and take out Hamas leadership there. But I have to ask, did that airstrike perhaps adjust the thinking of the rulers in Doha?
Oh, absolutely. But it did more than that, Brian. So if you may recall that after the airstrike, there was an emergency meeting of the Gulf Coalition, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and Egypt was involved. Pakistan, I think, was there. Turkey, I think, even though they're not Arab, they were there. There was a big movement from some of the countries, including Egypt, at the time, to try and get the regional countries to form some form of NATO-type alliance, so that if there's an attack on one, there's an attack on all of them. And Qatar was actually promoting that as well. They thought they could turn up with Egypt, and Egypt would be part of the part of the supplied forces. Turkey would be another one that would supply their forces. One of the countries that said no was Saudi Arabia. And they went away and they signed this enhanced deal with Pakistan. So Saudi Arabia now, in effect, has a nuclear deterrent through Pakistan. So all of a sudden, Qatar was even more isolated than just the airstrikes. Secondly, if you look at all of and I talked about the Texas A&M pullout from Doha City, there has been more of a focus, and ISCAP has been at the forefront of this, on the soft power and their ideological support, financially and otherwise, within the West, that the strikes has led to a catalyst that has left them very, very isolated. And I think that Qatar were looking for a way out, and the Americans then signed an even further enhanced deal with Qatar, because, yes, they've got the military air force base there. 10,000, I think, American troops are there. But now, it was signed a couple of weeks ago, I think, there was a deal signed where now the US has said that an attack on Qatar, if there's an attack by anybody on Qatar, we will defend. And I believe as part of that negotiation, Qatar, feeling isolated, knowing that all of a sudden, Israel could bomb us again, if they want to, and try to take out Hamas leaders or others in the way that they took out a lot of the senior military command within Iran, they found themselves boxed in a situation that finally they said to the people that they're housing and they're funding and they're supporting, you've got to do this deal. But I think we need to go further than this. It won't just stop. Because my concerns are that until Qatar disavows and actually takes steps to remove their support within the country and outside of the country of the Muslim Brotherhood ideology, in the same way that Saudi Arabia did and the UAE did, even after this peace deal, we're going to have more problems in the West, Canada, for example, than we will have within the Middle East.
So what we need is Qatar to find their own Mohammed bin Salman, who will say, this is not a good path for us. We need to change.
And we need to change and then implement the changes, because the changes that the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has initiated and implemented within Saudi Arabia have happened quickly. I mean, I first went. There was a time when I couldn't go to Saudi Arabia. It wasn't really safe for me. I criticised not the not the ruling family, but their support for Wahhabism and their support for Islamism on mainstream media, Sky, CNN, BBC, on many occasions. It wasn't safe. Just during COVID lockdowns, I went and had meetings with some very, very senior people. And I looked them in the eye, and somebody, I won't say who, said to me, Haras, you've decided to come to Saudi Arabia now and have these discussions with us. You've criticized us heavily in the past, and you haven't been here for 15 years to perform Umrah or Hajj. Why did you accept this invitation now? And I looked this person in straight in the eye and I said, look, for decades you have been one of the main causes of the problems that we're facing in the West and around the world. I was curious. I wanted to ask you directly, are you going to be part of the solution? And this person, without hesitation, looked me straight in the eye and said, yes, we want to be, and yes, we have to be. And I don't recognize, when I went during COVID lockdowns, I'd seen vast changes already. Women could drive. The religious police, the morality police had been disbanded. Every year, every time I go, and I sometimes go 4 or 5 times a year these days, I see something new. But the key thing is, they have not only removed the Muslim Brotherhood ideology, they've also moved away from the fundamentalist Wahhabist theology as well. Qatar needs to do the same. Until Qatar does that, until Qatar disavows this ideology and the Wahhabist theology, there will always remain a problem, and there will be peace in the region. There has to be peace in the region. Whether this peace plan works or not, there will be peace. I really believe it, because there's an appetite for peace. But this soft power funding of the Islamist ideology, and now Islamism beyond Islamists, that's happening in Canada. And by the way, I think Canada is one of the worst countries for this soft power. We have the jihadist terrorist attacks here in the UK, but you have this infiltration, this entryism within Canada far greater than we have in the UK. And I say that as somebody who's been in Canada a lot over the last couple of years.
And you and I discussed that about 18 months ago on this podcast.
We did. And
it hasn't gotten better.
It hasn't gotten better. And this funding and this support for this ideology, for these proxies, these aligned organizations, Muslim Brotherhood aligned organizations, who have first of all persuaded Muslims who are not Islamist within Canada that we're the gatekeepers, we're the only ones that are representing your interests, and secondly have persuaded schools, they've persuaded governments, they've persuaded the police, they've persuaded a whole bunch of other people, hey, we are the authentic version of Islam. Until Qatar stops this support, continuous support, we're the people, Canada, the UK and the US, who are going to continue to have these problems. Because the other side of this problem also, and we're starting to see it here in the UK, is there's going to be a backlash. And the backlash is creating something, people are calling it far right, but it's not far right. This ethno-nationalist and sometimes Christian ethno-nationalist backlash to what's been happening more visibly over the last 2 years with the protests and the encampments, etc., but has actually been going on quietly for a long time. We're the ones that are going to have the problems, and we need to deal with that. Qatar needs to do their bit, and we need to do our bit. So I'm hoping that Qatar now the pressure will continue, and people won't just say, oh, Qatar, well done, hurrah, hurrah. You've actually mediated and helped to do something that you actually could have done a year and a half ago, had you really wanted to do. But now that there's been an airstrike and Saudis gone their own way, and nobody wants to set up a military force with you, and et cetera, and, on your doorstep, you've been bombed and you've been exposed in the West to some extent. They need to stop doing that. They've got to realize that this pressure has to continue. Because if that pressure stops, it'll be business as usual in the West.
Haras, we could talk for hours, and that's what I appreciate about you. So wise, very insightful. Thank you for your time today.
No, my pleasure, and thank you for having me on.
There you have it. 2 very different viewpoints. They agree on some points, they disagree on others, and I'm sure it would be a fascinating discussion to have them both. But we leave it to you. We leave it to you to decide, to comment, to share this. Thanks for listening, and as always, do what you can to spread the word. Full Comment is a Post Media podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Proulx, theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer, and please help us out by posting this to social media, leaving us a rating or a review, and hitting the subscribe button. Thanks for listening. As always, I'm Brian Lilly.
Here's that clip from Canada Did What? I promised you. By the late 1960s, you have members of the Montreal police who can spend their entire shift rushing from one FLQ bombing to another. Here's how New Year's Eve 1968 played out for Robert Cote, a member of the Montreal Police bomb squad, which put him at the forefront of fighting the FLQ during this period. He was supposed to be at home with his wife, who had just miscarried twin daughters, but instead, at 11 p.m., he's called out to Montreal City Hall to investigate a bomb that had just gone off. He's en route with sirens blaring when he's told, "Actually, don't bother with the exploded bomb. There's an unexploded bomb on the other side of City Hall you have to defuse." And then, right after snipping the wires on the City Hall bomb, Cote has to speed west where a third bomb has just exploded outside a federal building.
The bombing started in April and May of 1963. That's when the first bombings took place. And the mailbox bombings were the most famous part of the whole thing, which was basically on the Thursday night and Friday night leading into the Victoria Day weekend in 1963. So, and initially they started attacking these symbols of federalism, federal institutions, whether it was the Montreal Post Office or Revenue Canada. But the bombings escalated as time went on in terms of the size of the bombs and the powerfulness of these bombs.
If you want to hear the rest of the story, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get your podcasts.